Welcome to the Perfectly Honest podcast where we talk about Christ and family relationships. I am Michael.
And I'm Kiahna.
And today we're going to talk about how you can be naked and not ashamed. But first, before we get into that, if I'm being perfectly honest, I am sitting around waiting to go on the trail right now. I have some buddies and my dad who are out backpacking.
Because your dad's not your buddy.
Yeah, he's not my buddy. No, he is. But we got to stick around here for a little bit. I might actually record out there with a therapist who's going to be on the trail with me. So,
which is so freaking cool.
So
awesome.
That would be fun. If we can get our mic stuff going. If not, that'll come later because I know he wants to come on here. So, yeah.
And if I'm being perfectly honest, I'm dreading Michael leaving me for 6 days.
Yeah.
You're going to have so much fun.
I'm really excited. I am going to have fun.
And like wives.
I'll miss Kiahna too.
Wives, it's so good for your spouse. Like, I feel like it's so good for husbands specifically.
Yeah.
To like go on trips with men, like other men, and to like be out in the woods.
It really is.
Kind of taps into the hunter within them, you know? I mean, you guys aren't going hunting.
No, we're not going. We're just backpacking. But it does tap into this. It's not even like about manliness. It's just about like going out and accomplishing something.
Yeah.
And being in nature.
Yeah.
So those things combined.
So as much as I'm going to miss you, I know you're going to come back a new man.
Yeah. I'm going to be a new specimen. So yeah, let's talk about we got some more like requests and things, which is really awesome. Please send us messages if you want to hear about anything on this podcast talking about that. Last week's episode, we're sorry that there was a little bit of kerfuffle with that coming out on time, but go back and listen to it. It's called Made in God's Image, and I think it was a really good, ending piece to talking about body image and all that kind of stuff. We'll probably talk about that more in the future, but that'll be on pause for a bit. So go listen to those if you want to hear about, the spiritual aspect of body image and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so this week we got a question about sex. Ooh.
Yeah.
It was such a good question though. So
it was really good.
To give like some background information,
yeah.
We're members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Yeah, give a little summary.
There's a certain culture around sex, and it becomes a very taboo topic in a lot of members' homes.
Yeah.
A lot of parents don't know how to properly educate their kids, or they feel like they gave their kids the talk, and then their kids are walking around like, I still don't know anything.
Yeah, I don't really know what's going on.
And then, you find yourself in a spot where you don't know who to turn to, what to turn to, because you want to find godly resources and Christian resources.
Yeah.
Right? That have like a gospel lens on sex.
Yes.
Because you don't want it to just be biological, that is a very important key.
Right. That is really important. I think that is actually possibly the best first step.
Starting point.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
First step starting point, because, it's not really necessarily good to describe a lot of things that have to do with arousal, maybe to younger kids.
No, that's not good.
As much as letting them understand the science.
Yeah.
And then when they start getting into teenage age, then it's okay, now that your body's starting to actually really experience this more frequently, and when you're going to school and whatnot, then you need to kind of have it becomes an emotional conversation, a little bit. And so let's talk about all of that today. I'm really excited to dive into this topic, actually.
No, it's going to be awesome.
Oh, and I was going to say, before we talk more about this, I just want to preface that, we don't really want to throw a lot of blame at, parents,
right.
either not even our parents,
mm-hmm.
we've had different experiences, even Kiahna and I.
Mm-hmm.
But you might be in a position where you are oh man, why didn't my parent teach us? But I was just learning about how my dad, they didn't even really talk about it in the home. And times have just changed.
Mm-hmm.
We've just gone through that was massive society. So not really important to blame the parents, but it's important to say okay, we're kind of growing, we're learning. Society's changing to where we have to be even better at teaching this.
Yeah.
So we're adapting.
Yes.
And that's good. It's good to look at what we can learn instead of saying you didn't teach me the way I should.
Right. Yeah. We're not trying to play the blame game, but
But it happens.
Yeah.
You don't get you get holes in your education.
Yes. And I also want to acknowledge that I know we have a wide range of people who listen to our podcast. We have people starting in like high school.
Yeah.
And then we have people who've been married for like 30 plus years.
Yes.
So we hope that you, no matter where you are in your journey of maybe being single or having been married and have a sexual relationship for a long time,
Yeah.
we hope you gain something from this conversation.
Yeah. So if you're in high school, make sure to ask your parents before listening to the rest of this podcast.
I know.
We're not going to get graphic at all with it. We're just going to talk about how to get good education and try to put a spiritual influence.
Yes.
And see kind of like, okay, where does the scriptures kind of take us a little bit? So, yeah.
So I guess I want to start maybe with my experience, like in high school and young women's.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I feel like I never got really good lessons about like the law of chastity in young women's, but I did have a bishop who would do like bishop youth firesides, and he would like say to all of the youth, he's like, guys, sex with my wife is great.
Right.
Like, it's wonderful. It is something to look forward to and to enjoy. But, like, here are the parameters for you guys right now.
Right.
And I remember thinking, whoa, like, that is so cool for him to just come out and say that, because you don't hear that a lot.
Right. You don't hear, like, this is a really awesome thing to experience. And you should be excited to experience that fully. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's pretty good messaging. So, like, I don't think that might be good to be, like, going way into detail about it, but that was, like, a healthy experience that you had, so.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is just a balancing act of, sharing, like, this is such a special connection that you will get to share with your spouse.
Right.
But then, teaching the parameters for the youth. But then it's like, you're so used to, as a youth, having, like, stop signs.
Right.
That when you get married and everyone's like, green lights, it's a go. You're like, but what do I do?
Yeah, like what do I do? Yeah. Well, and I'll share some of my experience too, considering my dad, like I think my dad's experience in his own home. I think it becomes taboo. Yes. Right? And so that kind of ended up like happening. I won't say that he's not been a safe space for me. That's definitely not been the situation. I kind of see where that came from. So like it kind of took me a little bit of time, and I actually had some friends even in high school who were pretty open and willing to like talk about it. Yeah. And like they had, so like the talks were definitely getting better. So it was like it wasn't really a huge problem. Yeah. Especially looking back, I was like, oh, I basically learned, like where I needed to. Now I would say like, pornography does not give you any knowledge at all. And I'll just say that from my own experience. Like I went into that like, thinking like, what even is going on? Like I didn't really know. Yeah. Right. So there is that conundrum too. But yeah, so this is kind of the difficult situation that we find ourselves in, even getting to college. Like a lot of us are like either I had some talk or like no talk at all, or like, I still feel like there's some holes. I still have some questions because maybe my parents were uncomfortable talking about it. Yeah. So, that's kind of what we're trying to deal with in our day to day.
So what do you feel like you did maybe in college or like as we were engaged to start preparing for like having a sexual relationship? Oh. Like, did you do anything?
Well, I would say that the best thing that I did, I would say that I did this throughout my life, and this is what was really awesome from my parents and church leaders, is they just encouraged me to be a good person and to think of women very highly, to respect them. And so, and now this was kind of a conundrum, is like when you experience pornography, and I don't want to we don't need to bring this up a lot today, but like people say, oh, when you view pornography, that equals you objectify women now, right? That was always the messaging. And I was like, I just, like, even though they were saying that to me, I was like, I don't actually feel that way. Yeah. Because I was like, the people in my life are real, and this is fake. This is fantasy. This doesn't exist. Like, that was like how my mind separated it. Yeah. So I would say that the best thing that I did was was really just like trying to respect women and boundaries. I hope you've seen that in our relationship.
Yeah.
At least as like, you know, because then when you get to your sex life, then you're actually open to being like asking questions like, are you comfortable with this?
Yeah.
Should we stop? Should we keep going? You know, because it's like, because that's actually so important for your own sexual happiness too, is your partner's happiness in it.
Yes.
So
Well,
like recognize that too.
That's what I was going to say is even in just a dating relationship or a courtship, you can model the type of communication skills that you are going to need in your sexual relationship.
Right.
Right? So in a dating relationship, you're learning how to set boundaries. That might be with your physical affection. That could be emotionally. That could be with your time. But it's learning very early in those stages how to tell your partner, this is what I need. Yes. I don't like this. I like when you do this, right? Those like very simple messaging.
Yeah, and that's like super good, like with holding hands.
Yeah.
Kissing, you know, it's like, I don't know, it might seem like weird. Like there are some moments where you're like, I'm going to make a move without asking, but it feels appropriate. Yeah. You know, like there is that. So
and spontaneity is appreciated.
Yeah. And that's why like dating is so important because you're learning that, you know, tug and pull. And like sometimes you're going to make a decision. You're like, you know, like, oh, they didn't want me to hold their hand and I went for it.
Yeah.
Right. Then you kind of learn. And it's better to learn that in dating than it is to learn that in sex.
Yeah.
Like you don't want to be
totally.
Like you don't really want to be in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a really good, you know, it's kind of like rough and tumble play. Yeah. Right? It's like it's like you're learning to regulate yourself.
Yeah.
In dating. So dating is super important.
Yeah.
Date frequently and be respectful, like just like ask questions, test boundaries a little bit because everyone has their own boundaries.
Yeah.
Not test boundaries as in like I gotta see where the line is, you know, but like test them in the sense of like asking and figuring it out.
Yeah.
You know?
And that's like an ongoing conversation, right? That's not just, oh, we talked about it once. It's always.
Now we can always hold hands. Now we can always kiss.
It's always changing depending on what season you're in. And I would say like maybe pro tip or helpful tip for girls, like you got to learn how to stand up for yourself and stand strong for your boundaries.
Yeah.
And like when something makes you uncomfortable, say no.
Right.
Because that's going to happen in sex too. There are some things that you're like, oh, maybe that didn't feel so good. And it's so important to know how to communicate that to your partner early on. Because I know there's a lot of girls who suffer for years in their sexual relationship because they don't know how to tell their partner, I didn't like that.
Right.
And it's so sad.
No, it's true.
Because God made our marriage relationship and like sexual fulfillment. Like he made that so that we could find a lot of joy and happiness in this life. And so if you're not finding joy and happiness in sex and in your marriage, that's really sad. Like God, that's not what God intended for you.
Exactly. And this could go down a whole rabbit hole with agreeableness versus disagreeableness.
Yeah.
Like women do tend to be more agreeable, you know, so it just has to be like a thing that you recognize.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't mean you need to become a disagreeable person and like not ever say yes to anything.
Right.
It's just that your yes needs to be really powerful. Like and so does your no.
Yes.
So like you need to have leverage and be able to say like I can say yes and I can say no. And you know what? Funny enough, if you say no to a guy, especially if you want to be with him still, but you don't want to necessarily like hold hands or kiss yet, like you can be like, no, I'm not ready for that yet. You don't have to say, no, I'd rather not hold hands. Because if you say, no, I'd rather not hold hands, the guy's like, okay, maybe she just doesn't want to be with me. But if you're like, no, I'm not ready for that yet, but I'd like to keep hanging out. Yes. Right? Like if you say, no, but then you're like telling the guy like, oh, I want you to like keep pursuing me. So, you know, and that happens in sex too. Like if you're saying like, I'm not ready for this, but I would like to like still like make out or, you know, right? So not to get more into those details, but it's like that does work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk about resources.
Yes.
That we can use.
Okay. So before we got married,
And I want to talk about the scriptures here too. In this.
yeah, obviously,
Yes.
we need to know what God says on the matter.
Yeah.
Before we got married, there was this podcast that I would listen to called Mormon Marriages. It's still out, like you can listen to it, but I don't think they make new episodes.
Oh, got
But
it.
we actually listened to a few episodes together, like on road trips when we were engaged.
Yeah.
And they would do interviews with Dr. Jennifer
Finlayson 5.
And she's known as like the Mormon sex therapist.
Which we would love to have her on here.
Yes.
Maybe we'll do that. Maybe we'll try to contact her.
Oh, that would be so cool. I would love to pick her brain.
Yeah.
But yeah, I found that to be a very helpful, very clean resource to be like, oh, like these are some struggles that people face in their sexual relationships. These are things that maybe I need to start thinking about before I get married. And then when we were first married, Michael's ex-girlfriend,
Yeah.
still a close friend,
Yes.
bought us this book. And it's called They Were Not Ashamed by Laura M. Brotherson. Guys, I don't care how long you've been married and how good you think you are in your sex life. You need this book.
Yeah.
Because it is like the holy grail, I want to say. Like any question you might have is in here. It talks about biology. It talks about the gospel lens. It talks about overcoming mental blocks. It talks about overcoming good girl syndrome. Like it is so good.
It really is good. And I was actually introduced to it before we got married.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually knew this was going to come as a wedding gift. So it's one of those things that, like, no matter what stage you are in life, it's a really good resource because it's got the spin on it from an LDS perspective.
Yes.
So it's really an incredible book. So that's called And They Were Not Ashamed, just so you have that again. And I'll say, too, since you brought up, I would say that some of my best sex education has come from my ex-girlfriends in the sense that
funny.
they were so open and willing to talk about it. And I really appreciated it because, like, I was like, I know that, like, we're not talking about that with us, like, yet.
Uh-huh.
Or, and he was like, some of this was like in high school / early college or whatever. But I was like, they had approached me and they said, like, did you learn all this stuff? And I was like, there's some things I don't know. Do you have, so we
like,
talked.
do you know?
So, I really appreciated that.
Yeah.
So, like, 2 resources right there. Like, if you have friends that are appropriate age, sometimes it can be hard, like, to talk about things with, like, a girlfriend or something, or, like, something like that.
Totally.
Like, that was kind of an anomaly of a situation that I had, but you don't want to necessarily just be arousing in that situation. Like, you want to be...
Because that can definitely take a wrong turn very fast.
It can take the wrong turn. So... you kind of have to be careful there, but still, I think having friends who are, like, willing to talk about it, or cousins or family, that you're not just like, you don't have to go to, like, a power or authority in your life.
Right.
Like, you just need to go.
Because that's very intimidating.
Yeah, because it's like, okay, I have to talk to my parents or my bishop. If that's not necessarily comfortable, or they haven't opened the door, for that, like, or if they tell you something that kind of makes you feel nervous, like, it shouldn't be a conversation that feels nervous. So,
yeah. Well, and I think the key with that is, like, our parents or our bishop or someone who's older and has been married for a long time, they are very far away from the beginning of the journey.
Yes.
And so they don't necessarily remember how intimidating it was.
Yes.
So I would say, like, the best resources would be someone closer to your age who's just a few steps ahead of you.
Yeah.
Like Michael's little sister, Sophia, she's so funny and she's so open and just ready to ask any question.
She is.
But she's asked me about sex. She asks her older girl cousins, the other sisters in the family. Like, she's just so ready and to ask those questions because she trusts
and even
us.
I feel like, oh, this is taboo,
You're like, why are you saying that to my sister?
It's like, we're not supposed to talk about this. What's going on? But yeah, it's really a healthy approach.
Yeah.
That she has.
And so. I wish that was something that maybe I had done more of going into, like, our marriage. But I was, like, the first one out of my friends to get married, like, out of my really close friends. So I, like, didn't really have anyone to ask. And so I was like, oh, do.
Like, oh, uh-oh. Okay, so I want to jump into this the scriptures now.
Mm-hmm.
So, now this goes back to the very beginning of the episode. I don't know. I found something that's really interesting in Genesis. Genesis is also a really good place to go because you see Adam and Eve have this battle, the same battle that we're going through.
Yeah.
Of going from innocence to not innocence. And being in a state of not having innocence is not a bad thing. You know, having a knowledge of good and evil is not a bad thing. It's just hard to transition from innocence to not.
Yes.
Right? So they kind of go through that a little bit. It actually says in Genesis 2 that they were naked and not ashamed. You know, man and wife, they were naked and not ashamed. And this was before they had eaten the fruit.
Yeah.
Right? So they were in a state of innocence, but it was also like, okay, right?
Mm-hmm.
So going to Genesis 3, I'm going to read verses 7 and then 10 through 11. And it says, "And the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves apron." And then going down to 10, 11, the Lord said, "I heard thy voice in the garden, and Adam said, I heard thy voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself." And then God says, "Who told thee that thou wast naked?" And I think that this is really interesting because Lucifer, I think, does this with sex. Because he paints, so like sex being publicized in the world is an evil, right? So he's trying to say it's evil in so many different ways.
Yes.
And he really makes it really confusing. And then he says, "Oh, you're naked," right?
Like
sex, it's bad.
Yeah,
it's always been
you should
bad.
Be scared.
And so
You're
the
doing
church
a
has
bad
fought
thing.
so hard against it.
Mm-hmm.
But we have this commandment to have sex.
Yeah,
to
multiply and replenish.
Multiply and replenish, which I could talk about that one. That's one of my things. But and then he says, "Hast thou eaten of the tree whereof I commanded thee that thou shouldest not eat?" And I thought that was interesting too, because it's like, did you go and do this thing without me walking you there,
right?
And going through this process,
yeah.
Because that was always the intention, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, like we don't have there are some what ifs, like, oh, what if, like, Adam and Eve were not tempted and they had just gone through, like, what was the Lord's plan, right?
Right.
We
don't know.
and I would say like that this was part of the Lord's plan. That's why he
Yeah.
put Lucifer there. He knew what was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But there's still this conundrum that's like, traveling from innocence to not being innocent, being knowledgeable, innocence to knowledge.
Yeah.
I will say that. I don't want to say innocence to not.
Because it's not necessarily.
It's not just like the lack of innocence.
Yeah.
Which is knowledge, right? Is the gaining of knowledge. But God is basically saying like that there are good ways, to get there. And even though you went down this wrong path, right? This goes back to sin, a little bit of what I talked about in the Sunday cast, is it's okay. Like, you're going to be able to turn around, and he says,
Yeah.
I'll provide a savior for you. Right. So, okay. So there's that. And then I wanted to go to Abraham 5, verse 19, or 18 and 19. It says, "Therefore shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. And they were both naked, the man and his wife, and were not ashamed." And like that's basically God's view of it. He tells us at the very beginning of the scriptures, right? Says the same thing in Genesis as well. Just want to bring in Abraham there. But he's basically giving us the very first message is, I want you to get married, and I want you to know that this is not a shameful thing.
Yeah.
That once your eyes are opened, even, it's not a shameful thing.
Mm-hmm.
So scripture's a great reference. There's a lot more in there about, how you should cleave to your wife. And God doesn't necessarily give us a lot of direction either. I think that part of figuring it out is what makes sex a lot of fun as well. So
I think it's
that's
one
good.
of like our greatest sources of creativity.
Yeah.
Which is like kind of weird to say, but
Yeah.
and also God isn't going to abandon you. Like, if you need help, you can pray for help.
Right.
And he can lead you to other resources.
Right.
Right. But I love that imagery of like cleaving to each other.
Yeah.
I remember hearing someone talk about like a new couple like exiting the temple, and he's like, man, like if couples would cleave to each other like Adam and Eve did
Yeah.
as they left the Garden of Eden into the lone and dreary world, like couples would just understand how important that union is.
Yes.
Because like now it's you, that little unit, you and your spouse, like against the world. And there's a lot of evil forces that are going to try to come at you and attack so many parts of your family and your sex life.
And tell you that you're bad or you're evil or whatever. And like I would say that the benefit of going through the trial of having pornography, not of using pornography, but going through the trial, is getting past that like I know that there are some bad things in the world, but over here, like I know that God wants me to do this.
Yeah.
You know? And he wants me to be, happy with my wife. Like, I think that if he were to come and see a couple who is like, oh, we only have sex when we're having kids, right? He'd be like,
be so sad.
Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
You have the happiest experience possible to you right now.
Yeah.
It's not sinful because you're saying it's sinful, but I want you to find in the scriptures where it says it's sinful for you to have sex with your wife. It doesn't say that that's the only purpose, right? Now, multiply and replenish the earth is a commandment. And, to replenish is just to have 2 kids. To multiply is to have more. That's what I think. But, that was kind of my thing there. It's more of a joke. It's just a joke. So
don't get offended.
Yeah, don't get the purpose is God wants us to have kids. He also wants us to be happy in our marriage relationship. Both things can be true, even if your plan is a little bit different for how you build your family. Both things can still be true. So
totally.
So let's talk about what are the resources that we've gone over so far? Are there any other resources we want to mention for learning, especially in the LDS environment? So
quick recap: Mormon Marriage Podcast.
Yes.
Anything by Dr.
Finlayson Fife.
Yeah.
She's awesome.
She's so good. And then the book, And They Were Not Ashamed.
Yep.
And then go to people you trust. If you don't feel comfortable talking to your parents, find another trusted adult or someone, like I said, who's just a few steps ahead of you.
Yeah.
That you know that you can have a meaningful, sacred conversation and it not be too much or too raunchy or whatever.
Exactly. Well, and that was something interesting in And They Were Not Ashamed, is it was saying that sometimes we don't talk about it because we're like, it's too sacred.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the thing is like, there is kind of the secret versus sacred, like that gets talked about as far as like the temple is concerned a lot. And sacred, if something is sacred, it just means that it needs to be taken in the right light.
Yes.
I think that that's how sex should be talked about. It should be talked openly and freely though, but in a way that's like I'm not going to get really gross and weird about it, so we definitely understand that, but just recognize that could be a reason why no one's talking about it.
Yes.
It's because people are like, well, it's too sacred, it's too personal. It's like, you don't have to talk about what you're doing in your sex life. That is too sacred. You can
keep that in your bedroom.
Like, that is too sacred.
Yeah.
That is a secret between you, and that's okay. We don't need to know that. But talking about sex is totally different.
About the fulfillment of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So hopefully this was really encouraging for you guys. Remember to ask God, search the scriptures for these things, and please ask us any questions if you have any more about this topic.
Yeah. I know we also had some questions about like how to teach your children, which we could do a whole episode on.
I know, we honestly should. And we did kind of touch on that a little bit, just like right stages of life, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe we should put that in the plans too. But yeah.
Yeah, guys, thank you so much for being here. Like Michael said, we hope this was uplifting and useful to you. And next week I will be flying solo. Michael is on the trail. So if you have any topics or questions that you would like Kiahna the expert to tackle by herself, I will gladly oblige. Otherwise, I have a lot of other ideas of what to do.
Yeah.
But thanks for being here. Follow us on Instagram, and I will see you next week. And pray for Michael that he doesn't die on the trail.
Please.
Okay, bye.
Bye.